It's April 9th, 1999, and for the first time this year, we have a pair of films that would share and split the same audience, same demographic, same target audience they were going for. Two flicks, both aimed for the teenagers, young adult crowd, both got released today on April 9th, 1999. Welcome to episode 14 of Shane Talks 99, and today we are talking about the film Go and the film Never Been Kissed. If you were a teenager going to a movie this weekend, you would have to pick, which one am I going to go for? Which one am I going to watch first? Am I going to pull a double feature today and watch both of them? Am I going to pay for one and then attempt to sneak into the other one, two for the price of one weekend? Both of these movies have huge casts. We're going to be talking a lot about the casts of both of these movies. So let's start it off with the 1999 film. It's Doug Liman's third film. This is his first film after his 1996 success with Swingers. We got Go. Go was written by John August, and it was actually originally supposed to just be a short film. John August had one other short film produced, so he wrote the short film that started out as Go. And after the studio bought it, they were like, hey, we really like the script, but we want you to expand it and make it into a feature-length story. So instead of just taking the original short that he wrote was what ended up just being the first third of the movie, which is called Rana. Her story was the short film that he wrote that got sold. So when they were asking him to expand it and make it into a feature film, instead of just expanding her story, he decided to take some of the side characters from her story and create, what was going on with them in their angles of the night, to create the movie. Parts 2 and part 3, we got part 2, which is where Simon ends up going to Vegas, and then part 3 is the actors. We'll get to them in a little bit, but August, since this is had a really hit and miss career for me. He wrote the Joss Whedon film Titan A.E. that I like. He wrote Big Fish, which I'm a fan of, and he wrote a Ryan Reynolds movie called The Nines, which also had Melissa McCarthy in it. Kind of weird, but in a weird way that I liked how it ended. It's a very bizarre sci-fi movie. I don't want to spoil the ending, because while I'll spoil things like The Sixth Sense because it's so huge and popular, a movie as small as The Nines, you've probably never heard of it, and you probably don't want that ending spoiled to you. But then again, after Big Fish, he started working with Tim Burton a lot, so he did stuff like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Corpse Bride, Dark Shadows, the Will Smith Aladdin movie, and then he also wrote both of the Charlie's Angels movies from the early 2000s. So really not a lot of stuff that I like in there. But getting back to Go, this film has everything. It's one of my favorite movies from 1999. I'm a huge fan of it. When I watched it, it just spoke to me. The music, the acting, the teenage stuff that was going on. This movie has sex, it has drugs, it has parties, it has fast cars, it has strippers, it's got guns, it has fire. And then it's got, actors being actors, and it has some Amway stuff in it. So wide variety of awesome stuff that goes on in this movie. We'll start with the Rana storyline, the original story, the first, act of Go. Main character of Rana is played by Sarah Polley, who I instantly developed a huge crush on because of this film. And then later in 1999, we get to see her again with Jude Law in the sci-fi film Existence, which I'm excited to talk about because that's just an onion to peel back of sci-fi awesome. Her favorite film that I ever did was a couple years later. She did a 2003 film called My Life Without Me. It's her. She's married to Scott Speedman. She finds out she has ovarian cancer and is going to die very soon. So she actually ends up having an affair with Mark Ruffalo, only because she's never slept with anybody but her husband. She kind of just goes, because she knows she's going to die, she makes this list of things that she wants to do before she dies. She writes letters to her children for every one of their birthdays up until they're 18. She writes graduation letters. She just does a lot of stuff to prepare. And she finds another female that she wants to set her husband up with when she's gone. So it's a very interesting concept of how this person deals with finding out that she's going to die. It's called My Life Without Me. I highly recommend it. The whole cast is phenomenal. Very small indie, low budget movie. Rana's best friend in the movie is played by Dawson's Creek's Katie Holmes. It's another one of her movies where she's trying to break away from that WB, which became the CW. She's trying to break away from that WB stigma that was going on around, like Good Girls and stuff like that. The year before this, she had done Disturbing Behavior. And then the year after this, she'll go on and do The Gift, where she ends up topless in that movie. So she was really trying to distance herself from Joey Potter. As Rana attempts to become a drug dealer, because another character named Simon that we'll get to in a minute, Simon goes out of town to Las Vegas. That becomes chapter 2 of the Go story. While Simon's gone, she decides to go straight to Simon's drug dealer, and she meets Timothy Olyphantastic. Timothy Olyphant. Just coming off Scream 2 a couple years earlier. The next year, he's going to be one of the cops that's chasing Nicolas Cage in Gone in 60 Seconds. So, like, height of Timothy Olyphantastic getting big and getting huge. There's a lot of characters that have, like, very small scenes here in Chapter 1, or Act 1, or Part 1, or however you want to call it. They're going to show up later on, and we'll get to them then. So, Act 1, Chapter 1, Part 1, it all ends at a rave that's been talked about throughout the whole, like, first, 30 minutes of this movie. And this is where Timothy Olyphant's character shows up with a gun. He's going to shoot Rana for the stuff that she has done to him during the first act. And then Rana gets hit by a yellow Miata. And that's kind of where Chapter 1, Act 1 ends. Kind of on that nifty little cliffhanger there, and a bewildered Timothy Olyphant trying to figure out what to do because somebody just killed the person that he was trying to kill. So, yeah. Then we jump back to the beginning of Act 1, and we see the same scene play out between Rana and Simon, and it's Simon trying to get Rana to take his shift. Simon's doing this because a bunch of his homies are going to Las Vegas and he wants to go with them. So Rana takes his shift. That's how she ends up in the situation that she's in Act 1. And Simon is played by a British actor named Desmond Askew. Not a lot of other film credits to his name. The one thing I will go off and say before I get to his couple of film credits is my earring right here, the middle earring. I went and got this piercing done after I saw this movie because that's what Simon has in the film, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever at that time. So I think I'm kind of like emotionally attached to this earring just specifically because of the movie Go. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I did when I was younger. I liked to emulate characters in movies that I liked. So yeah, this earring completely because of the movie Go. As far as Desmond Askew goes, his only other two real major big film credits both came in the year 2006, and they were both horror films. He was in the Hills Have Eyes remake, and then he was in another horror film called Turistas. So Simon goes to Vegas with his homies. One of his homies is Taye Diggs, and Taye Diggs was a part of 4 movies in 1999. He's like our 1999 movie king. Aside from Go, he was also in the movie The Wood. He was in the movie The Best Man, and he was in the movie The House on Haunted Hill. All movies that we get to talk about later this summer. So that's going to be a blast talking about Taye Diggs and some of his other roles that he had here in 1999. I'm really confused how he had time to make all these movies, because if you look back, he was in the original cast of Rent that debuted in January of 1996. So I don't feel like he had a very short run there. I feel like he was, probably should have looked it up. I feel like he probably was on Broadway for a couple of years at least. After the Nederlander Theater, I just can't, after they moved to the Nederlander, I can't imagine he didn't stay on for an extended period of time. So he was a very bi-coastal New York City, Los Angeles. I don't know where, all 4 of these movies were filmed, but it sounds like he was probably pretty busy with both filming and doing Rent on Broadway. One of Simon's other mates was played by Breckin Meyer, who was coming off Can't Hardly Wait in 1998. And then later this year, he's also going to be seen in the Al Pacino, Russell Crowe film called The Insider. And technically, Breckin Meyer was in a 3rd film in 1999, but it was technically only a Canadian release. But it was a movie called Tail Lights Fade. It's actually a movie I really enjoy. It's not the greatest, but it was a very low budget. And it's like a Kevin Smith adjacent film because it was written and directed by a guy named Malcolm Ingram, who would collaborate with Kevin Smith on a lot of stuff from then moving on until now. He just produced the Kevin Smith documentary about his life called Clerk. But anyway, Malcolm Ingram did this movie called Tail Lights Fade. It was Canadian. It even goes as far as to have a cameo by Jason Mewes at the end of the movie. playing a character named Jay. So yeah, I don't think I'm actually going to cover Tail Lights Fade in 1999 since it was only Canadian and I didn't see it until a year or two later on DVD or VHS. Probably not going to be a normal Shane Talks 99 episode it gets talked about, but I do think I'm going to talk about it later because there's a couple of movies that were international movies that had success in 1999, Boondock Saints being another one, but because they weren't technically released in the United States until 2000, I think it's going to kind of be like Shane Talks 99 bonus stuff that I'm going to do next year. I got a few, like I'll do a 2000s Oscar episode next year for the Oscars that talks about all the movies from 1999 that won Oscars and stuff like that. So, yeah, Tail Lights Fade. We'll get to that at some point on the Shane Talks 99 podcast. Back to Go. Let's get back to talking about Go. Chapter 3 of Go features a pair of TV actors played by Scott Foley, who was an actual TV actor on Party of Five, and Jay Moore, who was fresh off of the Cameron Crowe film Jerry Maguire. These two characters are in Chapter 1 for a brief period of time. They invite Rana to a house where they're trying to buy some X off of her. When she arrives, she ends up getting introduced into William Fichtner's character, who's a real cop and has a very small part in Chapter 1, but a very large part in Chapter 3. William Fichtner has an amazing resume up until this point. He was in Quiz Show, he was in Heat, he was in Strange Days, he was in Contact, and then he was, of course, opposite Bruce Willis in Armageddon. So the film also has, Chapter 3 has a nice little cameo from Melissa McCarthy when we reveal that the two actors are actually a gay couple and they have both cheated on each other with the same other character. Melissa McCarthy plays that guy's roommate, so they go to their place, and Melissa McCarthy has a good little comedic bit that she gets to do in a movie that's, I wouldn't say a serious movie, but the drama or the comedy in it is very subtle compared to like the dramatic stuff that these characters are going through. So the whole movie wraps up the next morning in the wake of the events that happened at the rave. We find out Rana did survive. I said earlier that she was killed. I was just saying that for dramatic purposes in my storytelling of the movie Go. But she actually ends up turning out to be alive. We get all the stuff that goes on back at Timothy Oliphant's flat where Simon shows up after all the stuff he got into in Vegas. His actions from Vegas follow him back to Los Angeles, and we've got, a bunch of other crazy stuff that goes on for the last few minutes of the movie. Now, just like the 10 Things I Hate About You soundtrack, I really want to go into some of the music from this movie because it used to be one of my all-time favorite soundtracks. I've gone back and tried to listen to it recently. It didn't hold up as much as it did back then, but I still absolutely love New by No Doubt. I love Steal My Sunshine by Len. There is a remixed version of Magic Carpet Ride by Steppenwolf on this soundtrack that is just really well done. There's also the Gangsta Trippin' song by Fatboy Slim because literally you cannot make a 1999 soundtrack without having a Fatboy Slim song on it. He's been on a lot of soundtracks in 1999. Natalie Imbruglia and Eagle Eye Cherry are both on this soundtrack, and I dig both of them. So like I said, about half the soundtrack I love now. The other stuff, the rave techno type stuff that's on there, it's not terrible. It brings back good memories, but it's just not the kind of stuff that I listen to now. Like 20 years ago, I could put this disc in my CD player in my car and listen to the whole thing while I was driving. Now I really just listen to the music from the bands that I like. So again, not a bad movie, not a bad soundtrack, but just not what it was then. Our second film tonight, we have the rom-com Never Been Kissed. And this is a really odd flick for me because when it came out in 1999, I didn't really care for it. I didn't like it. I didn't hate it, but it was one of those movies where I was like, I don't care about it. So a couple of years ago, I did a rewatch of a lot of 1999 films, not as deep dive as I'm doing for this podcast, but the ones that I had access to, I'd pull it up and I'd watch it. Never Been Kissed was one of those. And it kind of changed for me. I watched it a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh, it's not as bad as I remember it being. It's kind of cute. It's enjoyable. Last year when we were doing our rom-com episode, Jason Richardson brought up that it's one of his all-time favorite movies. So I really was like, okay, let me give this another go. And I think I liked it a little bit more that time. So this week for this podcast, watched it again. Probably liked it a little bit more than I did last year. It's one of those movies that's kind of growing on me. I'm kind of enjoying it the more and more that I watch it. And that makes me happy. Our lead in this is Josie Grossi Geller. She's played by Drew Barrymore, not a popular kid in high school, but now she's a successful writer. And she's assigned to go undercover in high school and write an expose about high school teenagers and what they're getting into. So essentially, this movie is the plot of Cameron Crowe's real life. So, as I said, played by Drew Barrymore, she's just a couple of years off Scream that came out in 1996. And her brother in this movie is played by Scream co-star David Arquette. So you got a nice little Scream connection right there in this movie already. Eventually, throughout the course of storytelling in this movie, David Arquette's character also goes undercover in high school because he's got unresolved business that he never got to play baseball in the big game. He got injured, and now it's his chance to go undercover and take after his sister and play baseball again, where he might get seen by a scout, who then he'll have to explain to the scout that I'm really like 23 years old and not a high school kid. But the plot doesn't need to address things like that. One cool subplot that's going on in this movie is when David Arquette's character goes undercover into high school, he ends up picking up a high school girl that becomes obsessed with him, this cute little blonde girl, who is played by Carmen Llewellyn, a character, or an actress that was in the film Chasing Amy. She was Amy's girlfriend in the first half of the Chasing Amy movie. She had short little spiky blonde hair in that film. Also, she was also Jason Lee's wife. So it was really cool to see her pop up because, like, I recognized her immediately, and I was like, "Oh, that's really cool that Jason Lee's wife was in this." And I, didn't realize it the first time I saw it. So let's take a look at the other teenagers that are portrayed in this movie. Josie Geller's best friend is played when she goes undercover is a high school girl played by Lily Sobieski. She's going to get another mention later this year when she shows up in Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. There's a kid named Giuseppe Andrews. Went on to do a lot of like little stuff in Hollywood, but his other huge claim to fame is the 1999 film Detroit Rock City, which I'm really looking forward to going back and watching because I remember liking it a lot, but I don't really remember a lot of the movie. I don't think I've seen it in like 20 years. It was one that I remembered liking, aside from the fact that I'm pretty sure Giuseppe Andrews plays the knockoff version of Jay Muse in that movie. There's like a stoner character, and I'm pretty sure that's who he plays. So we're going to give that another shot and see how it holds up. The popular girls in high school are played by Jessica Alba, who is obviously phenomenal in pretty much everything she does. And then Marley Shelton. That's right. Wendy Peppercorn herself is in this film as one of the popular girls. And it's really cool because we got a nice Scream connection going on here because Marley Shelton would later play Judy Hicks in Scream 4 and Scream 5 with David Arquette in both of those movies. So that's kind of cool. Then we got a nice little Indiana connection. Hammond, Indiana has an actor from there named Jeremy Jordan. Sadly, this is not the same Jeremy Jordan from the last 5 years or Smash on NBC. Different Jeremy Jordan, but he's like the super popular kid in high school, and his sidekick is played by James Franco in one of his early film roles. So now we're going to look at Josie's work colleagues, and this is a laundry list of just good actors and comedians. Molly Shannon, my SNL 90s crush, is her coworker. John C. Reilly is one of her coworkers. Octavia Spencer is one of her coworkers. Gary Marshall is her boss. Alan Covert has a small scene. Sean Whalen plays Josie Geller's assistant in the movie. And then Black Lightning himself, Crease Williams, plays kind of her cameraman, more of like her camera truck operator guy. But it's really cool to see a young version of Crease Williams, because obviously most recently I've just seen him as Black Lightning on the CW. So that's really cool. And finally, we're going to wrap up this cast talking about Michael Verton, who was in the 1998 indie film with Matthew Lillard called The Curve, or sometimes it's billed as Dead Man's Curve. That's really what I know Michael Verton from. I know he's on a bunch of TV, but it's never really been stuff that I know he did one episode of Friends that I've seen him on, but Michael Verton. Yay. I know he was big in the 90s. I just don't really know a whole lot about him. So finally, this movie was directed by Raja Gusnell, who was famous for being a film editor. He would go on to direct some stuff that I don't really care about. Like he did both of the Scooby-Doo films in the early 2000s. I feel like he did something recently that wasn't bad, but he was a big editor and edited a lot of big stuff in the 80s, like Teen Wolf 2. And then in the 90s, he did stuff like Pretty Woman, Rookie of the Year, Mrs. Doubtfire, and he was the editor on Home Alone and Home Alone 2. So, this was a good first directing thing for him, like I said, because he went on to do Scooby-Doo, which was garbage, but Anyway, Raja Guzno, always a funny name when I see it pop up somewhere. So Never Been Kissed is actually available to stream on Disney Plus if you haven't seen it or want to watch it again, or just have Disney Plus. That's where it's available to stream at. Next week, we've got another blah week, to be honest. The movie Life is Martin Lawrence and Eddie Griffin, I believe. I can't remember. But they play two guys that get sent to prison for life, and it just follows them through all their antics in prison. I don't really remember caring for the movie, so we'll see how it holds up this week. Another indie film that came out next week is Friends and Lovers. I know I've seen it. I don't remember it at all. And then finally, a movie that I have not seen that I've heard amazing rave reviews about is a movie All About My Mother. I believe it's Pedro Almodovar or something like that. But I know my buddy Troy is a huge fan of All About My Mother. So here it's kind of depressing. I'm not entirely sure I'm going to enjoy it, but as long as I can find myself a copy of it, I will end up watching that also. So that's what we got going on next week. Thank you for listening to this amazing week, because Go has always been one of my favorite movies, and Never Been Kissed has been finding its way into my heart, and that's a lot of thanks to Jason Richardson for kind of, making me watch it a couple of times recently. So thank you guys for listening this week. April 16th, 1999, I'll be back.